How do you prove that an AI model is safe enough for patient care? Our guest helps write this playbook. Dr. Shauna Overgaard, director at the Mayo Clinic, joins us today. We caught her while she was traveling, and she thought that the recording would be off camera, so expect a candid discussion. Let's jump in. Dr. Overgaard, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's great to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah. So for people who don't know you, Dr. Overgaard, who are you and what do you do?
I'm a scientist. I am a professional who's very interested in promoting the use of artificial intelligence or any real innovation toward safe and ethical, responsible implementation into clinical practice. So I think that there's opportunity between the research that we're developing, and then getting that into the clinical practice in order to help our patients. I think that there's significant delay. We know that in translational science, it's been set up to 17 years for basic science research to enter the clinical practice. We think it's very similar for artificial intelligence, thereabouts, a type of innovation. And so, for that reason, I have been focused on AI translation and expediting innovation to clinical practice. The not hang up, but the chief tension is wanting to expedite innovation, but as a scientist, wanting to do it in such a way that is rigorous and highly ethical and anticipating any future potential issues or needs or negative impacts on our patients. And so during that, I've been working with our teams in larger Mayo Clinic initiatives on risk management to try to understand what is what is it exactly that we need to be asking and testing in order to facilitate enterprise-wide and scalable AI solutions that are appropriate for patients. In doing that, we formed the Enterprise AI Translation Advisory Board quite some time ago. We saw a need to represent subject matter experts across the AI lifecycle. And the time when my mentors said that the most important thing that I needed to do in getting my teams set up was to make sure that I had every stakeholder in the room. And I think I mentioned this, and it is overwhelming to think about not only having all of the stakeholders, but having all of the expert stakeholders of Mayo Clinic in the room, and just knowing that all of them have incredible training and interest in not only defending the patient and advocating for the patient, but also advocating for their perspective as trained scientists or trained professionals.
Yeah, so one thing that you mentioned was the code to bedside gap,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that comes up quite a bit. So I'd love to dig further into that, but first, I would love to know how you originally became interested in machine learning and what sort of originally got you to the intersection of machine learning and medicine.
I grew up in a very rural area in Canada. I mean, to the point where I had like cows on the neighboring fence of my tiny little school. And we didn't have computers. But my teacher thought that it would make sense to enroll members of our school into a competition that was through Macintosh computers. My job then was to create the computer of the future. And so I proposed something that was basically a handheld, well, it was an Apple, it was a Macintosh Apple, handled Apple with like keyboard. And you could also be able to like call your mom, and then somehow you'd be able to access the newspaper and things of this nature. And so,
So you invented the iPhone?
right? I mean, well, I
They must
like
have
definitely
stolen
did.
your idea.
Like, this is the funny part. Okay, exactly. I definitely did not. I admit to not having invented the iPhone, but I just want to tell you, I won the national competition, Nathan,
Wow.
and they gave us 4 computers for my tiny little school in the middle of nowhere. And then when the iPhone came out, I literally had friends, like, messaging me saying, like, "So, is this like, what? That's crazy. Is this you?" Isn't that funny?
Steve
So,
Jobs must have been in the audience
I know, I
at
just
that
feel like
point, yeah.
Steve Jobs really yeah, I should look back on it, but anyway, thought that was a funny icebreaker.
No, that's great. That's, I mean, it shows that you've been, like, interested in, like, innovation for a long time, and it's sort of been something that's driving you.
Exactly. That's
S
exactly it.
so, in terms of innovation and, like, the pace, the new iterations on, like, the advancements of technologies, you've sort of been in different worlds. So you've been in the more, like, startup entrepreneurial space, and you've been more in the more established business space with the Mayo Clinic. What is the difference in the culture in those 2 environments? What's, like, the difference in how fast you're able to iterate?
Yeah, it's interesting because at this point in time, I actually feel that Mayo is doing a quite an impressive job on supporting innovators through, like, our Mayo Clinic platform, and we just had this program, called JETRO with Japanese innovators who are focused on healthcare, most of which is focused on AI. And so with that perspective, there's a very strong startup mentality, startup community. We try to apply the exact same thing to some degree in Mayo Clinic by trying to, I mentioned, minimizing the gap between research to practice, but also by trying to align like research as well as commercialization. So there's a lot of documentation that needs to be done for research in terms of the institutional review board. Our leaders in IRB, as well as those that are part of governance, we've been working toward aligning that documentation based off of the different stages of AI translation and rigor, such that we would make it more easy to create testing environments where we could offer those as protocols for FDA submission for our commercial products, and then expedite not only in Mayo Clinic in terms of governance, taking a risk management approach, but also thinking about allowing an easier stream for our researchers, clinicians, innovators, et cetera, to be able to deploy externally. And so, yes, it's taking forever, and, like, but that 17-year thing is extremely true, and it's something that we've been working on, for quite a while. Certainly been the focus of the last probably 2 or 3 years of my career. But with that, I think that there's opportunity to determine exactly how much rigor is required for evaluation of AI solutions, such that we at least lower the bar for very low risk solutions to support the practice.
Yeah,
And that's exactly, I think, the area of focus and the way that Mayo's been approaching it recently.
yeah. Yeah, so the FDA's regulatory process, was developed with traditional medical devices in mind, and it's often lengthy and costly, which can be prohibitive for a lot of smaller and even larger companies. How can entrepreneurs and smaller teams and even bigger companies like the Mayo Clinic, how can they get from coding to bedside faster without sacrificing safety? Do you believe that a regulatory overhaul is needed to better support the rapid software development while still protecting patient well-being?
I love that the proposal could be, an overhaul, and I think that that's the general direction that a lot of folks are going. I think that I don't I don't really believe that an overhaul is needed, in part because I think that the FDA is trying to do us a favor in the sense that we're using regulatory standards that apply beyond software as a medical device, looking at quality management systems. I would like to think that with the approach of organizations being able to self-govern, at least in these early stages, that organizations will be willing to step it up in part because I see healthcare adoption of AI being so slow, in part because of the incredible risk that it could potentially pose to patients. And so for
Yeah.
that reason, to me, it seems that, and this is, of course, my perspective from Mayo Clinic, and I'm thinking Duke, Stanford, and Johns Hopkins, other organizations at least that I've been closely affiliated with, we've all been very rigorous and almost to the point where some of us are getting pressure that we're being too rigorous. Like it's like too much, and we're at risk of reducing the opportunities for patients. And so it's the idea of safety to our patients, I think, is just such a deeply seated predisposition to those that work in healthcare, again, at least those that I've had the exposure to, that our guard is up. And especially our clinicians are taking incredible responsibility for any kind of output that the AI model makes. And we had the problem of the AI translation gap in AI, in part because we needed to be able to provide sufficient evidence to our clinicians who were prioritizing patient needs and protecting our patients, such that they would need that scientific evidence to believe that this was in any way valuable for them to change their practice and include. And so I think that the FDA, at least the folks that I know at the FDA, they've really been trying to work with organizations like ours to support us and also to understand how we're thinking about the broader implications of regulation in AI. And so I think if we can do it like in a like a an aligned kind of a partnership collaborative approach with governing bodies, I do think that we'll be in a good position to support patients and also to provide low patient, or I guess not risk-free, but at least determine the risks and benefits, of AI solutions that are going in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like a fine line that you have to balance, like how quickly do we want to be pushing this forward and like saving, potentially improving the health care for so many patients, but at the same time, there's those risks that you need to address, and it seems like it's sort of an area where you can't really make everybody happy.
Yeah. Exactly. That's a great point. I'll tell you one area that we're, I think, especially interested in now in pursuing and understanding more is how to include our communities in AI development. So a lot of it, so if you think about it in terms of wasting people's time, and so like I mentioned that we had the interest or effort to bring in multidisciplinary stakeholders from across the AI life cycle. In that sense, one of the pushbacks for that was, "Well, aren't you wasting the time of, say, our, machine learning, engineers, data scientists, or nursing informaticists," like, all of the people that are paid well, that are spending time or hours in the development of something. How do we then justify spending the patient's time in developing something? I think that, like, I mean, now that I say that out loud, obviously, we wanna bring in the patients as soon as possible, and that's what we're trying to do, but exactly when and exactly how and to what degree of autonomy do we wanna provide patients is in question. Along the lines of autonomy as well, I think that patients owning their data is something that I feel strongly about.
Yes, yes,
Um and I have, this is something I've kind of held on to. You mentioned the entrepreneurial days of Clarity Applied Intelligence. For me, it was just really trying to, well, first it was trying to commercialize my dissertation work, but realistically, it was trying to create a database for the individual where we could continuously learn off of uh, sorry, how do I even say this now? I wanted to be able to give patients the autonomy to see their own data and to act on the output of AI models. And I wanted to be able to signal and trust their intelligence such that we would be able to include them in decision making.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, let's talk more about that actually,
okay.
because that's something that I've heard you bring up before. For those that don't know, we originally met at the Mayo Clinic AI conference this past year, which was awesome, but it was like so much was going over my head. It was crazy, just because of how many smart AI researchers you had in that one room. But one thing you talk about is patients owning their own data and even being compensated for its use potentially.
Yeah,
Could you talk more about your vision for that, and how do you see that playing out in practice? And potentially what role might technologies like blockchain have in that?
exactly. Yeah. Okay. This is not Mayo Clinic's, like, I have not pitched this to Mayo. I just want to be super clear. Um, I am headed that way though. When I was living in Fergus Falls, just prior to coming to Mayo Clinic again, my husband's dream was to practice medicine in the town he grew up in. And so we went there to do that. And I left Mayo, and among directing an AI program, I also, or sorry, a healthcare analytics program, I also sought out some of this startup training. But all the way through doing that, I knew I wanted to return to Mayo Clinic. And I started just continuously reading about what Mayo was doing and was noticing that they had this 10-year strategic partnership with Google, and thinking about, like, also the Mayo Clinic platform and how they're working on acquiring data globally in a, like, de-identified, fashion. And I also started reading even more about, blockchain, and my brother and I actually, my 2 brothers and I had a business, well, it was Clarity Applied Intelligence. I had them on with me. One of them's, is in biomedical sciences, James, and, Ryan was a PhD philosopher who was interested in AI ethics. So we were just, like, rocking it, having so much fun together with this, but our idea was to figure out how to create a database for the individual and how to host that, how to be able to connect to patient portals, so thinking, like, incredible interoperability, of course. Thinking about, like, a graph theory. Part of my dissertation work was on, graph theory, nodal connections, in 3T MRI, but the logic of it, being applied to different nodes of subject level data is something that was intriguing to me. And then if you magnify that, just over the course of years of individual lives and aggregate data of different patient populations and organizations, to me, it seemed that we would be able to create a learning health system, which would include, rather than just a hospital environment, it would include the individuals as the primary nodes. When I think about the ownership of the data, it's apparent that, of course, the data that we're collecting in hospitals, clinics, that goes towards supporting our patients, our individual patient needs, yes. But the way in which it's being used, especially now as we're partnering and we are developing new tools, models, methods, I do think that there's opportunity to provide financial support for individuals to are giving their data either to through the hospital. I'm thinking about some of our passive data collection, Oura Ring, watches, etc. I think that if we can create an autonomous environment for patients to be able to have ownership, to see the output of their data when it's used in an AI model, that that can continue to grow itself. And I mentioned learning health system, but I think that that can continuously expand and become even more pervasive. And then add the digital twin component to all of that. And so I see there being opportunity for a digital twin of every patient and creating a simulated environment where we can have, if you think about like probabilities, we can have different kind of versions of that patient based off of potential interventions or potential illness, just by changing some of the aspects of those data.
Yeah.
Um, and so
Yes.
that, like, is not a well-formed statement, and I apologize, but that you kind of like the vision is like I can see it and how to articulate it, I'm not quite sure yet, but I some of those aspects, Nathan, I'm trying to bring into Mayo right now, actually.
Yeah.
So,
I th
yeah.
I think that's a beautiful vision, and I think it's very equitable and giving people the ability to feel ownership and to even, like, reap some of the rewards for giving
Yeah,
their data,
yeah,
because no matter what, they're gonna be giving their data, so we might as well, give them some upside for it.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
I could see how there could be pushback to that idea, um, because
Yeah,
right now, like, let's face it, like, people are just giving up their data for free, so, like, going from that to saying, "Actually, we're gonna pay you," I could see that how that could be difficult considering how a lot of hospitals have really thin margins.
but which hospital doesn't have thin margins, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So, we I think it would be an incredible opportunity to in our main mantra, and our mantra, prioritize the needs of patients, the needs of the patients come first,
yeah,
to demonstrate that and solidify our commitment by giving patients that access and providing them financial compensation for the way in which we use those data. Yes, we're taking care of them, but we're also thinking about the opportunities now to scale our AI solutions and get to get to support different groups that may not be represented in the Mayo Clinic data set.
mhm,
Um, and in part, it's not be in part because it's because not everyone can get Mayo Clinic care.
yeah,
And to me, that's I mentioned I worked at, like, a small hospital for a while. I remember thinking I'd just come back from Mayo, working on my dissertation work. I'd just, like, gotten out of grad school, and I was chomping at the bit to create, AI models and help this small hospital out. We were having difficulty even accessing the data. And so, like, how not only can we not provide oftentimes, and I have to be careful what I say, but, like, obviously, rural clinicians are excellent. My husband was one of them. But there's also just an incredible amount of support and technology and tests that can be done at
mhm,
Mayo Clinic where they cannot be done in smaller institutions.
yeah,
And so it's unrealistic to expect that we would be able to provide Mayo Clinic care at all of these small hospitals unless we were to figure out a way to expand the Mayo Clinic network of care. If we were to scale our AI solutions such that they would be able to be run within smaller healthcare settings. But even then, we would want to be able to locally train our models on the patient data that was available there.
yeah,
And so if we go into these some of these rural clinics and some of these smaller areas, it's almost like it's almost worse if we just expect that we'll be able to train. Yes, we're trying to help them, but to some degree, it just feels unethical. Like it doesn't feel right. I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what you touched on there is the fact that, one, I giving patients the opportunity to opt in to sharing more data will be beneficial in twofold. So one, they could potentially get compensation for it if that system was developed. But two, they'd be opting into providing more high quality data, which could be used to help train models. And that data could be coming from specific groups that are potentially not represented as much in the data that most of these models have. How do you remove bias from machine learning models? And, what are some ways that maybe Mayo Clinic is doing that?
So how do we ensure that our AI models are at least have bias mitigated. We're talking about in maybe rural settings, gaining access to some of the local data to train our models specifically for those populations. And in order to do that, we need to gain access to the data. But with Mayo, it's like you can imagine that if we were to do, which is, I guess, in my opinion, the right thing of being able to pay and support other people for their information, we could not only improve the amount of information that we would have, but we would also be able to reach those who require who are currently not being reached appropriately. And for instance, Mayo has developed the Houses Index, which looks at socioeconomic status, but looks at patient level data based off of some of objective measures, publicly available measures, and their proximity of housing location to things like hospitals, nutritional sources, etc. What we've found is that models even within Mayo Clinic. So, for instance, we have one called the Asthma Guidance and Prediction System that is for our pediatric patients for determining asthma exacerbation. Even in deploying these PEDS asthma models, we find that the performance of our models for identifying patient asthma exacerbation, which could potentially be life saving, don't perform as well in lower socioeconomic status or the lower socio index. And we talk about like wanting to minimize the gap. And I'm thinking, like even at Mayo Clinic, we're struggling with deploying AI solutions ethically in that sense because we're trying to avoid any kind of discrimination. We're trying to bring the best care for the patients that we are serving, but we can't even identify them properly. And in part, what we found is that that's because of missing data. Like the reason our models perform so much more poorly on the lower indices is because we don't have sufficient data to represent them in order to train our models to identify them and to make accurate predictions or recommendations. And so it seems to me that by using like our proposal, Nathan, of trying to bring in data or supporting patients to provide data by, I guess, supporting them financially, then that could be a way to open up at least the connection between the patients that we are having the most trouble helping and then those that we want to help.
So, machine learning models, they often mirror our human biases. So, given that the data reflects real world imperfections, is it truly possible to create fair and unbiased models, or is bias inescapable with AI?
I think that bias for the near future is inescapable with AI. Yes. Unfortunately. I think it's helpful that we or hopefully that we're starting to realize that, and I think that that's in part what AI has done, was shed this incredible light on us and how we are as human beings, and I'm hoping that as it continues to do that, we'll be able to change our behavior and, change the way that we do clinical practice or just be able to test and anticipate the needs or potential issues that we would run into. It's sort of the like, almost like this, like, moral like, it's like a moral imperative to try to reduce the bias, of course, but, like, I wish like, to be totally honest with you, like, I have no idea how to do this. Like, I can't confidently stand or, like, sit in front of you right now and say, "I know exactly how we're going to rid the bias, and I know that this solution is going to be excellent and helpful for all patients everywhere." Right now, the way it's going, I think it's going to continue to exacerbate discrimination. It's going to continue to make things worse for people who legitimately deserve care. And so I think that part of the effort in taking that is just acknowledging that that's where we're headed and being willing to advocate for that in the way that we look at our models, in the way that in the research that we do and the research that we publish, but also in trying to present like more or less like innovative solutions on how to do those evaluations. So, for instance, one thing that we are piloting now is to through so looking at simulation-based studies. So I'm talking like creating a workflow within our multidisciplinary simulation center and trying to understand and study discrimination after a clinician or operator has seen the model and made a decision on patients. And are there ways that we can measure that? Automation bias, for example, the speed at which our clinicians make decisions or judgments based off of the AI model, I think there's large potential for an interaction between automation bias and discrimination based off
Yeah.
of implicit bias. That is yet to be proven or even, quite frankly, studied in detail. But those sort of things, like being willing to step out of what's comfortable and just look stupid, at risk, and hopefully in exchange for advancing like humankind and its relationship with I think that's what will need to happen.
No, that was a really hard question, but I think you answered it elegantly. And one of the ways that bias might be removed from these systems is increased transparency.
Yeah.
So I know everybody knows OpenAI was originally an open source company, and now they're, the complete opposite of that and more focused on product building and profits based off that. And they are very non opaque with what's going on inside the company.
Yeah.
Um, so given that AI models rely on proprietary algorithms and private data, how can transparency be realistically achieved without compromising intellectual property?
That is I mean, obviously, that's a hard question. That's why you asked it, isn't it, Nathan? I love it. I so yes, that is something that we're trying to figure out. In fact, it's part of the transparency working group for the Coalition for Health AI, and that was one of our biggest struggles was we had developers, innovators who when we're talking about the level of transparency, it becomes very uncomfortable because, yes, we're trying to support human health. And it's again, like I talked about moral imperative, it's like this weird tension between wanting to help our species and yet do well for our companies or livelihood. And so it really takes this new perspective of supporting like, the group or community, which may or may not make us more highly evolved, if you think about it. But,
Yeah.
it's very difficult. So, what we have been thinking about, or at least the interactions that I've had, have been looking at the model performance, providing an understanding of the data that the models were trained on, but also something we're doing at Mayo is really highlighting the level and types of risk that are associated with the model for the transparency to give those that are interacting with the model sufficient autonomy, control, and to exercise their accountability for the decisions that are being made. But in
Yeah.
terms of, like for instance, there are quality assurance labs that are being discussed right now on a national level that are working to solve that problem as well, letting an external body or an objective body perform an evaluation and then kind of agreeing on what the output of that should look like. But not everyone agrees with that either.
Yeah, have you noticed any pushback from different members of the healthcare teams, like maybe even physicians specifically? And are there people concerned about job displacement?
Yeah.
How do you address that?
Yeah. Um, there are I think that depending on what circles we're in discussions with, because like our Mayo Clinic nurses and informaticists are like many of them are researchers who are like highly published and they want to make sure that we're doing all of this appropriately. Like they're part of the group that are like almost looking at the rigorous science perspective and or are not almost but are. But the pushback that we've been getting, I would say, is somewhat mitigated by the opportunities that are being created. And so the way that it's being positioned at an enterprise level, again, just as far as I'm concerned, is the education that's going out is in support of helping those that are interacting with any of the tools to be able to make like decisions or be skeptical with it. And so when we think about like training people to interact with models, we want them essentially to not trust the models. We want them to use their brain's superior knowledge, etc., humanness to be able to make calls on that. And I think that that is helping to some degree. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think maybe one of the ways that you and your teams have worked to start implementing these models is silent trials. Silent trials allow AI models to be tested in real time without influencing patient care.
yep, that's right.
Could
And
you
that helps.
explain more what silent trials are and what do you think about this approach?
So what that is like, say, for example, I mentioned the asthma exacerbation model. Say, for instance, you were running a model on patient care, but you did not want the clinician to see the output of the model, but you still wanted to know what the result would have been. That's essentially what's going on, is it's capturing the data, like, when the patient is seen, if the model's running in the background, it's processing all of the information as though it were operational within the encounter, but the clinician isn't seeing it, nor are they responding to the output of that model. And so it's kind of like we get to look at the data and say, like, oh, this would have happened if this was the output of the model. This was the output of or this was the decision of the clinician. How does that align? And what would have happened had the model presented differently or the clinician made a different judgment call based off of the output of the model. And then there's also a component of integration. And so trying to figure out exactly how the model would integrate in a simulated environment, for example. One of the big pain points is also deploying models into clinical practice, as you know. So something we're trying to think about is creating an environment for testing and integration, but deploying it in such a way that it would be realistic enough that our clinicians and test patients would be able to engage with the model, and trying to red team it or see how we can stress the model, change the output of it, look at the potential privacy security issues, and then also just see how our clinicians are responding, to that, and then the after effects or impact to the patient as a result in an environment where nothing is actually impacting patients. It's kind of like a protected, safe environment to get all of the, um, potential issues out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're currently living like in Rochester, Minnesota, home of the Mayo Clinic.
Yeah.
Could you talk about some of your favorite things about living in Rochester?
Yes. Um, okay, so we moved to Rochester, not because we had to, because at the time my position was actually remote, but I wanted so badly to be part of the campus again because I find it incredibly inspiring. Like the hustle bustle, but just seeing the patients that are coming in every single day, just, like, opening doors for them, seeing the looks on their faces, trying to, like, understand where they're headed with care, seeing the happiness, hearing the stories, like, there's so much. That's, I guess, my favorite part is literally being on campus. Like, I'm on campus right now. I don't have to be. I just like the environment so much. That's one of my favorite things. Yeah, I've got 3 girls. They're all, like, brilliant spitfires and hilarious, 16, 10, and 8 at the moment. There are incredible extracurricular activities available here. I just love it. And, I also like the diversity. Like, it's a pretty small town, but Mayo pulls from, like, around the world in terms of
Yeah.
getting the best of the best, and so it is so nice to have my daughters just exposed to different cultures and different ways of life. So that I love. Their extracurriculars, I just get a kick out of it. So there's a youth enrichment league here at Mayo, and last night had my daughter in fencing.
What?
Like, I
That's so
know,
sick.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I was, like, on the side going, "Hello, my name is Himiko Montoya. You killed my father. Dead to die." Like, that kind of thing. It was just so it was so fun. I was just, like, sitting on the gym floor trying to finish some of my work and watching her, like, have a total riot doing these things that we probably would not have been exposed to in, many other places.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
They've got a
beautiful.
pretty wicked, soccer program here.
Mhm.
It's a rush, so, girls are into that as well. But
Yeah.
I also love the hiking. I enjoy trail running, so we've got some nice trails here, mountain biking as well, Game Haven, for example.
Yeah, you mentioned, your amazing family, but I'd
Yeah,
love to go, you know, deeper and
sure.
understand, Dr. Overgaard. What gives your life meaning?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's definitely the girls and trying to be an example for the girls. It's also just trying to be the very best Shauna Overgaard I can possibly be, like, in terms of not just in terms of, like, achievement or athleticism or whatever, but, like, as a human being, it's so hard. There are so many things that come at us, and trying to figure out how to be resilient, that is one of the things that makes me tick, is just, like, grew up in pretty impoverished home. Never like, I'm talking, like, running water was an issue, like, it was even in Canada and no heat, like, come on.
Mhm.
But I always saw there being opportunity to get out of that, and I think, like, my parents did better for me than they had themselves, so they're already, like, pushing it forward. So for me, it's like trying to strategize through life to be as resilient as possible and to kind of like observe myself outside of my body. Now it sounds super weird, but you're nodding, so you get it.
Mm.
And like facing adversity, I had my mom passed, my brother passed, and it's just like the people that really knew me and believed in me, are gone. I mean, my dad and my other brother are outstanding, as are my family, just for the record. But they were kind of the people that would always give me these pep talks, and I could hear them in my ears, like, and all of a sudden they were gone, and like a part of my humor left, because my brother left, and so like he's the only
Yeah,
one that really got all my jokes. So,
yeah.
I don't know, just that kind of thing, and realizing that every single human being does that. Like, we all have things that we have to stand up to and face to be our better selves and be a better human being and, like, make judgment calls that feel so frustrating in the moment, but you know that you're rising above the noise and the occasion. That's for me, like, that's kind of my aim and my goal, but I also see opportunities strategically more as like a global or humanity perspective. Like, how do we as an entire group of humans rise above the noise and like get over that whatever that feeling is that might I don't know what to say. Just the feeling of how do we rise above it as, like,
Yeah,
an aggregate group, Like,
yeah,
encouraging people to do that. Yeah, anyway.
yeah, and you mentioned, one of the things that really gives your life meaning is how can you help the next generations put their best foot forward, and what advice would you give to people in high school or college, who are worried about their future in these uncertain times with the AI revolution coming
Yep.
and a lot of uncertainty?
Yes. Oh, man. I think, like, knowing or just if they can let's see. I wanna tell them that they can do it, that I know that they've got it in them, And whatever it is, whatever fire is burning inside of their stomach and they know what that is, it is so hard to believe enough in ourselves to pursue that vision or that the thing that really gets us impassioned and that logically guides us. I think that one of the keys to overcoming a lot of this uncertainty and being resilient is trying to maintain that fire and believe in humanity, believe in that people are, really good at heart, but to pursue those goals or that vision that they have for themselves relentlessly, like, in terms of, being able to apply to the benefit of other people. I don't know, that was pretty brutal, I'm sorry about that.
No, it's great. But yeah, Dr. Overgaard, thank you so much for talking with me today. Honestly, I had so much fun in our conversation, and I can tell that you really have put a lot of thought into a lot of aspects of what's happening right now with AI. And
Yeah,
um, I think I'm really glad that we have people like you in healthcare who are leading this charge. I'm glad that you're here in my home state, Minnesota, and pushing the culture forward. So, thank you so much, Dr. Overgaard.
thank you so much, Nathan. Thanks for in return, thank you for pushing all of this, bringing conversation forward, having the courage to ask these difficult but such important questions, and just continuing to persevere. Like this is truly like helpful stuff. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.